The Democrat and Republican conventions have ended. The race to the White House has picked up pace.
This is the most important election in the history of our country.
Love and hope and light join in the battle for the soul of the nation.
A historic American election marked by the pandemic, unemployment, and a reckoning of racial injustice.
The end of this chapter of American darkness began here.
Who wants to keep us completely in the dark?
Will the voters keep America great or save America's soul? This is the battle for America.
Very good evening. You're watching WION. World is One. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. Let's kickstart with WION VOA co-production, our special presentation on U.S. election. Now, the Republican National Convention wrapped up in the United States with some procedural events still being conducted in the host city, Charlotte, in North Carolina, and speeches given in Washington, D.C. and other cities as well. This semi-virtual convention nominated President Donald Trump as the incumbent candidate in the November presidential election. His supporters in the Republican Party believe Trump is the best candidate to handle the economy and other issues of concern. Here's a report.
This convention will come to order!
Delegates at the 2020 Republican National Convention pledged their support for one nominee. But for Donald Trump, it wasn't this easy the last time.
Trump was a hard sell for a lot of people in our state.
Utah is one of the most conservative states in the U.S. 4 years ago, Delegate Amy Winter Newton supported Florida Senator Marco Rubio and didn't even vote for Trump in the election.
I wasn't sure he was the real deal. I wasn't sure he would really do what he said he would do.
But she says President Trump proved her wrong.
He's not afraid to go after hard issues. And you look at the Middle East peace talks that we've had recently, that's a prime example of some of the things that President Trump has brought to the table.
Delegate Oscar Brock was proud to sit behind his state sign as Tennessee voted for President Trump this year. But he was also a 2016 Rubio delegate before switching to Trump.
Trump was a voice of freshness. I mean, he was so different than establishment politicians from the last couple of decades, and he promised to do something new.
Brock says the president delivered job growth and a strong economy prior to the coronavirus. A Pew Research study shows that the economy is the #1 issue for 8 out of 10 voters in November. American voters will have the chance in a little over 2 months to decide whether the president's policies and track record on the economy will be enough to return him to office for another 4 years. Carolyn Persutti, VOA News, Charlotte, North Carolina.
Track record on the economy. That seems to be the top and key focus for all Americans this hour. Let's get in a sense of perspective about the Republican National Convention and the U.S. general election campaign. For that, I'm joined in by Voice of America's Nova Poerwadi, who is joining me live from Washington, D.C. this hour. Nova, a very warm welcome to you. Now, again, the economy seems to be the main concern among Trump's base and Republican voters in general. What's your assessment?
Well, it was an interesting convention, to say the least. Both were interesting because both had to be done virtually because of the pandemic. The Democratic convention was done totally virtually, whereas the Republican convention was done semi-virtually. There was the acceptance speech of President Trump was done in the South Lawn of the White House, attended by many, many people, including the delegates who had voted for him in Charlotte, North Carolina. And there was no visible masks, perhaps also reflecting the overall tone of this party, the Republican Party, which is more pro the resumption of business instead of masks and social distancing measures. The economy remains one of the top priorities, and actually based on the running on the economy alone would have assured President Trump re-election in November. Many analysts had given him the odds of winning back the White House in November, but of course the coronavirus happened and devastated the economy. So this was a theme that was brought up in the Republican National Convention, what he'd done in the past 4 years or so to boost the economy with unemployment at 3.5, which was the lowest historic level.
Right. Nova, it's interesting that you alluded to the tone of the convention. How was the tone of the convention, which was partially also virtual, like the Democratic convention?
Well, it was interesting that the convention was also ended with fireworks, as normal conventions do when they're outdoors, like it was this time. But at the same time, there were demonstrators right outside the White House with a sign saying Trump failed, 180,000 plus have died. This, of course, shows the polarization among Americans of how they view this presidency. A lot of people have said that there's one similar thing about the Democratic National Convention and the Republican National Convention, in that both seem to be more retrospective rather than offering detailed policy choices. Now, the interesting thing is the retrospection is very different with each of the conventions. With the Republican convention, the retrospection has been for the past 4 years, including the low unemployment numbers I showed you, I told you about, and also the economy, and also new trade deals renegotiated with partners like Canada and Mexico, and basically things that they feel are the achievements of the current administration. Now, the Democratic National Convention is more retrospective on the past 6 months, with the coronavirus ending with a lot of lockdowns and the economic devastation it wrought. And so they've both been retrospective, but on different time frames, Achanka.
Some very, very interesting observations shared by you over there. I'm going to just request you to hang in there because there's so much to talk about, Nova. For now, let me also talk about the Democratic Party, which also held their national convention a week before the incumbent Republicans. That is something Nova was also talking about. The opposition Democrats held a fully virtual convention with taped speeches, a virtual roll call, with a general feel of a nationwide Zoom meeting as well. This was different from their last convention in 2016 with full fanfare and tens of thousands in attendance. Let's see what this Democratic convention looked like in the time of the pandemic.
What a difference 4 years and a pandemic makes. Democrats are holding the first virtual convention. Instead of bringing tens of thousands of people to one city to nominate and celebrate a presidential candidate, they appear to be bringing the convention to the people. Their 2-hour primetime convention show is using short videos to create an atmosphere of watching a social media feed.
The Democrats understand the ways that in communication we would say the message has to meet the media and vice versa.
Vanessa Beasley is a communications professor at Vanderbilt University. She says eliminating the crowded arena created an aura of intimacy for viewers.
I think they made some really strategic decisions about what it meant to go virtual in television as a particular medium, but also thinking about the way the rest of the media would pick up particular clips and sound bites to circulate on social media and news channels today.
Viewers noticed the difference right away, with dozens of choir members singing the national anthem from their homes across the country on what appeared to be a giant Zoom call. Democrats are also taking advantage of user-generated content, dropping in videos from ordinary people at strategic spots in the program.
One of the real advantages of a virtual convention is that you could bring together partisans in small groups around the country and essentially have a nationwide meetup.
Another difference from previous conventions, shorter speeches. Even former President Bill Clinton, known for his lengthy convention speeches, was limited to just 5 minutes.
You have to actually have very few words in the speech, because if it goes well, you need to leave a lot of time for the audience to respond. So if you think about the amount of time the speaker has, you're thinking about really short sentence constructions, leaving a lot of room for pause.
We proudly cast our 25
One of the hallmarks of any convention is the roll call vote of states to officially select the party's presidential nominee. But instead of a state delegation leader straining to be heard over the crowd noise, viewers who have been mostly homebound during the pandemic were treated to a virtual trip across the country as delegations cast their votes in visually appealing locations. A big concern is whether the virtual convention can generate the kind of enthusiasm and zeal that a live convention can bring.
I think the most important thing for the parties at the conventions is to get their nominee in front of an arena-sized crowd that is cheering and screaming and applauding. And there has always been, as in the television era, there's always been pressure to do that.
According to Nielsen Media Research, 18.6 million viewers watched the first night of the 2020 virtual convention on broadcast and cable networks. That is down 27% from the 2016 convention's first night. But the Biden campaign says more than 10 million people watched it on various internet platforms. Steve Reddish, VOA News, Washington.
And so to talk about the Democratic Convention and the road ahead, let's go back to Nova, who's joining me live from Washington, D.C. at this hour on this broadcast. Nova, how different was the Democratic Convention compared to the Republican Convention?
Well, it was very different for the reasons I talked about before, about the retrospection and, looking back 6 months instead of 3 years or 4 years of the Trump presidency. And of course, each also pretty much vilified the opposition candidate. And now they're rather the same, but also there's also a different tone. The Republican National Convention was a little bit more angry and also fearful of what a Joe Biden presidency would do to the so-called achievements of the Trump administration, according to Republicans. Now, also one difference, though, with the Democratic Convention was there was no interaction in terms of cheers, live cheers and such. And one effect of this has been to perhaps gloss over some of the differences of opinion within the party itself. Now, in the Republican National Convention, you hear that you hear the allegation that Joe Biden is going to be the word Trojan horse was mentioned a few times, and also the fact that he's going to channel the more progressive, the more radical wing of his party, which is still controversial for mainstream America. But in the Democratic National Convention, you kind of see the splinter between these two groups. Because remember, in the primary process from earlier this year, Joe Biden was actually fighting against the progressive radical wing of his party. And I was there at the last Democratic National Convention before this in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And every day there were protests by the Senator Bernie Sanders camp, who didn't warm up to the then candidate Hillary Clinton. We didn't get to see that this year, and we don't know whether the prevailing sentiment among Democrats is going to be vote blue no matter who, or Bernie or bust, which turned out to be the case with a lot of voters in 2016, Ashanka.
Right. Since you just highlighted some very, very crucial aspects, and we all are aware of the fact that Donald Trump is losing out as far as opinion polls are concerned. Now, the big question everybody is asking, not just in the United States, but also in India, is what is the likelihood of Democrats taking back the White House in November?
Well, Akansha, national polls show Joe Biden in the lead, but as we know, this is not a national vote. It comes down to state by state, and it's usually determined by several states which are called either swing states or battleground states. These are states which are not necessarily heavily Republican nor Democrat. States like Michigan and Wisconsin, which last year broke for Donald Trump. And interestingly, the birthplace of Joe Biden, Pennsylvania, was once thought to be a solidly Democratic state. And it voted in the previous 6 elections for the Democratic nominee. But in 2016, suddenly broke for the Republicans and voted for Donald Trump. And now in these states, the lead of Joe Biden in polls is a little bit, it's not too significant. So we'll see whether the pendulum moves in these states. Of course, the difference is that during the last election, Hillary Clinton was basically running as an incumbent because she was from the Democratic Party, the same party as then President Barack Obama. But this time, Joe Biden is running against an incumbent who is a Republican, President Donald Trump. And whether the animosity towards President Trump is enough to motivate voters, including those who supported Senator Bernie Sanders or another progressive candidate, or even another moderate candidate who may not be enthused to go to the polls to vote for Joe Biden, whether they might be motivated because they simply do not want another 4 years of Donald Trump. That is what we will continue to see, Akansha, in the polls of the battleground states.
Polls of the battleground states is, of course, going to make it a very nail-biting race. But now, thank you so much, Nova, for sharing your precious inputs on this broadcast. We'll keep coming back to you for more details as far as U.S. election is concerned. Shifting focus.
My father has strong convictions. He knows what he believes.